Welcome back. This is going to be the second lecture of the first chapter. In this lecture, I will guide you through what could be considered well-known examples of complex networks and the associated research problems network science can address. Whether it turns out a benefit or an affliction, we become a part of networks as soon as we are born. Whether or not you are an active user of social media like this baby who seems to be uploading selfies to Instagram, it is hard to imagine that you are absolutely unplugged from this hyper-connected world. One of the downsides of connection is that as we rely more and more on these tightly knitted networks, vulnerability emerges when part of a network is not functional, whether it is due to a random failure of nodes or edges or due to an intentional attack. As discussed in the first lecture, the connectivity arising from interactions may give rise to totally unexpected complex behavior that cannot be accounted for by the properties of individual components. Presumably, the most intuitive and familiar example of network is the Internet and World Wide Web. They are a part of our everyday life. We are so massively and heavily dependent on this technological infrastructure. By the way, what's the difference between the Internet and www? Yes, as many of you already know, the Internet is the computer network or a network of devices, whereas www is the network of web pages that are connected through hyperlinks. Let's say when you buy a new laptop and try to use the Internet on campus, you'll simply bring it and pick up the radio signals generated by wireless access point or router that is connected to the rest of the network using physical wiring. Of course, for the Internet access, you need an approval from the local campus IT service department. But on a larger scale, the Internet is a distributed system comprising many voluntarily interconnected autonomous networks. So no one person, company, organization, or government has authority to control the Internet. Then the question arises, are there any strategic designs or plans to improve the robustness of the whole network against inevitable errors and malicious attacks? How do we enforce these strategies, if any? Or are there any incentives at the individual level to promote this strategy at the autonomous system level? So this is a geographical representation of the civil aviation traffic among the 500 largest international airports. Each line represents a direct connection between airports. The color encodes the number of passengers per day traveling between two airports. And the table shown here is the world's top 10 busiest air routes in terms of number of passengers. Interestingly, the overwhelming top of the list is the Jeju-Seoul-Gimpo route. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, nearly 40,000 passengers used to fly per day, from Seoul to Jeju and vice versa. And around 220 flights used to be flown along this route, which corresponds to a takeoff and landing every 7 minutes on average. And the human brain is also a prototype of complex network. Our thoughts, reasoning, and cognitive power is supported by this connection of several tens of billions of neurons. To understand its function and potential anomalies, we need to understand how the neuroelectric signals propagate along this wiring diagram of this huge number of neurons. The Human Connectome Project was a 5-year project launched in July 2009 to build a network map that will shed light on the anatomical and functional connectivity within the human brain. Also, it was aimed to produce a body of data that will promote the research into neuroscience and also the brain disorders like dyslexia, autism, Alzheimer's, and schizophrenia. And one of the not so rare applications of network science is the international relations. Contrary to a naive expectation, your enemy's enemy is not necessarily your friend. If you have heard about the frustration phenomena in glass systems or spin dynamics from the physics context, frustration is not uncommon in international geopolitics. Take Israel, for example. Not many countries in the Middle East and North Africa have friendly relationship with Israel, as you see here. Egypt and United States, though not a Middle East country, have a friendly relationship with Israel. However, the relationships these two countries, Egypt and the U.S., have with other neighboring countries are not so consistent with the diplomatic stance of Egypt and the U.S. On top of that, the relationship is not static. It's constantly changing over time. If you are a high official of an involved country or the United Nations, you may want to study network science. As I said, the international geopolitics is dynamic in nature. This is a graph representation, a snapshot taken 2 years later than the previous slide. You may want to play the spot the difference game between the two and may want to check if there is really no eternal allies and no perpetual enemies. Then what is the long-term and short-term strategies to make our world more peaceful and livable place? Okay. This is a graph showing how friends on Facebook are connected. Again, this is a hopelessly complex system composed of 3 billion users connected by another billions of devices from computers to cell phones. These systems looking just random at first, but upon close inspection, it displays endless signature of order and self-organization whose quantification, understanding, prediction, and eventually control is the major intellectual challenge for the science of the 21st century. Our very existence at the cellular level is rooted in the ability of thousands of genes to work together in a seamless fashion. If you remember your Biology 101, you might be familiar with this glycolysis and citric acid cycles and the various anaerobic fermentation pathways that are responsible for interconversion of metabolites and biomolecules. But the whole blueprint is even more complex. Furthermore, in a living cell, there are no physically isolated conduits or insulated transport channels like in the electronic circuit. Everything is mixed in the soup of proteins, nucleic acids, and small molecules. But somehow this murky soup sustains life and replicates itself for inheritance. This is probably one of the most prominent mysteries of all sciences. So, for clinical research to understand and cure diseases or for metabolic or biochemical engineering to utilize the capability of microbial cells, we need to know first the wiring diagram of the genes and their products and their interplay with small molecules inside the living cell. So the signal transduction, regulation of gene expression, and metabolism makes another good playground for practicing the network science. A recent trend in medicine is the application of network science towards identifying, preventing, and treating diseases, which is called a network medicine. And disease network is one of the most active research topics in the network medicine. This is the seminal work published in 2007. Originally, this network was a map of disorder gene association pairs. But somehow the authors could project this diseasome into two separate node spaces, which is human disease network, the connection between the diseases, and disease gene network, connection among those genes responsible for certain diseases. The technical details will follow in later lectures. So the following of the associated analysis gives us a hidden relation between diseases that are caused by the aberration of the same gene, or the relations between the genes that are responsible for the same disease. Needless to say, it is not a surprise to apply this knowledge for drug discovery and drug repositioning research. To speak a little more about drug discovery is another well-defined target of network science. As you are aware, there is no drug but has side effects. That's not a surprise if we consider the chemical reaction network occurring inside a cell. Even salicylate or aspirin, one of the safest and the most effective non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, has side effects, such as stomach pain, stomach bleeding, and ulcers. Though in most of the interaction reaction pathways shown here, aspirin consistently inhibits the inflammation, there are pathways working in the opposite manner. Okay? Scientists working on drug discovery should consider all these aspects and weigh the relative cost and benefit appropriately. Action may be good in general, at least in many situations, but almost as harmful as it is beneficial. Think about the pandemic we are now going through. Small word may give us a snug feeling, but when it comes to epidemic spreading, it's definitely a curse. This time-lapse animation was produced by a group of scientists led by a network scientist, Alessandro Vespignani. As we see in this case of swine flu, and actually we are experiencing COVID-19 pandemic, the controlled operation of aviation network is not a curiosity-driven academic issue, but quite a practical problem. Okay? Look at this spreading of epidemic diseases. How do we use the knowledge from network science to contain, to block the proliferation of these diseases? That's a big question we are experiencing now. And indeed, a group of scientists from Spain looked at this effective control problem involved in the removal of airline routes to contain the epidemic spreading. First, let's say we close the top 1/3 routes according to betweenness centrality. We'll come back to this concept of betweenness later in the lecture. So we remove 1/3 of the routes with highest betweenness. Then the whole network is now clustered into a disconnected set of nodes, as you see by different color. So there is no trans-Pacific flight. No flight from Seoul, Incheon to Los Angeles. This may be a good thing, but there's always a trade-off. If we shut down international borders, what about economy? What does it mean? Especially for those countries that heavily depend on international trade, like South Korea. This will cause a lot of economic suffering. So the author's suggestion was their own elaborate and sophisticated algorithm called efficient containment strategy. If we use this rule and remove the top 1/3 routes, the overall connectivity is sustained for the same level of disease proliferation control. Okay? So that is one example showing the power of network science. All right, so far we have briefly looked at some exemplary cases to which network science can be applied. We didn't have time to talk about the similarities of different networks, but one interesting and actually important concept of network science is the universality of network characteristics. The structure of networks observed across various fields of science, nature, and technology are more similar to each other than we expect without any prior knowledge. So I hope this is a small motivation for the next lecture.